You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 80. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today we discuss the future of digital conference presentations. Let's get to it. All right, welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast. Paul, how's it going?
It's going pretty good, Chris. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. My wife and I are on sort of a mini working vacation. We just had a coupon thing to use, and it's at the historically speaking, since this is an archaeology podcast and it's somewhat technical using geothermal stuff, we're at one of the oldest developed hot springs locations in Nevada they put 1862. They found it like in the title because they're that arrogant, but it's 1862 David Wally's Hot Springs Resort or whatever hell. And so yeah, it's pretty nice. They've got some like built up, like 6 tubs, like pools out there, like hot tub kind of things, except they're the water is supplied from obviously the ground hot spring water. And they built the whole spa thing around it. You can do the whole mud wrap treatment and all that BS too. But it's nice to just sit out there because we're right at the base of the mountains, right actually next to Genoa, Nevada, which is Nevada's oldest settlement, 1851, and just a stone's throw from Lake Tahoe. Really, it's right at the top of the mountain. So. Yeah, it's pretty nice. So we're doing all right.
It sounds really rough.
I know, right? So anyway, as they tend to do, the SAAs and as conferences tend to do, as I was saying, they tend to generate a lot of ideas and thoughts if you go to the conference, right? Sometimes those ideas and thoughts that you have are tossed right out the door when you drink too much at the bar that night. However, if you didn't and you remember what you saw at the conference, like I did, I just constantly think about stuff, and I don't want that like. I'm glad I have a podcast as an outlet to talk about these things because I don't want that sort of energy to die, I want to have something to go back to and say, oh, yeah, I remember when I was talking about that, and that was what I was thinking about. So at the SAAs, one of the things I spent a lot of time on, or one of the places I spent a lot of time was in the poster session because, I like to record a lot of audio when I'm there. And one of the best places to actually do that, since the SAAs and most people won't let you actually record their presentation. And honestly, if I'm only interested in one paper in a symposium, to go in there and like hook up my thing and then, record that and then come out, that's kind of intrusive and they're not really set up for that. So one of the best ways to talk to people and actually get some good segments is during the poster session. And in fact, the previous episode of this podcast, episode 79, if we release this on time, was actually go back and listen to that. And that's all segments from the SAAs 2018 in Washington, D.C. So, but anyway, going to those poster sessions, there's one thing that really struck me, and that's that posters really haven't changed. They really haven't changed as a form of interaction with people. I don't know if ever. I mean, sure, a long time ago they were probably hand-drawn kind of fairs or something like that, and then they became, I don't even know when the poster session started, but they became this thing that not just graduate students, but it tends to be a lot of students that do posters as kind of an intro into presenting at a conference or something like that. Yeah. But there's a lot of people that do it. I actually see a lot of posters from CRM firms, Far Western, which is a firm out here. They always have posters at the conferences. They do a lot of work with getting their information out there, and posters is one of the ways that they do that. So, and it's also in the SAAs framework, you can't present more than one time in any certain column of types of presentations. So you can give a paper once, you can do a poster once, and you can be on a forum once, but you can't like give 3 papers or give 3 posters or something like that. So some people, if they've got multiple things to present, they'll give a paper for one thing and they'll give a poster for another thing and then call it good there. So, but anyway, posters just haven't really changed much. And that's what I want to talk about now. Now, Paul, you and I didn't talk about this when we were talking before the show, but I had a thought back in your college days when you may have gone to some conferences and things like that. What do you remember about poster sessions?
Yeah, I'd go, I haven't been to a conference in quite a few years now, actually.
Yeah.
But you're right. I don't seem to remember a whole lot of change in them. I do remember laser printers seem to have improved the visual quality of a lot of them. Likewise, photo quality printers have made them much more colorful than they used to be. But aside from that, the format is the same. You've got a couple of poster boards up on a desk or a table. And if you're lucky, the researcher, the creator of the poster, is standing there, and you can talk to him or her and find out what they found interesting. They can give you a synopsis, point out what's the most interesting about the that they've highlighted on that poster. But yeah, the basic format and how things are displayed, aside from minor twiddling around the edges with the graphics, I don't think that I saw any appreciable change in that format, which isn't to say that it's not a valuable format. It's great to actually be able to go and see what junior researchers typically are up to and be able to talk to people face to face and have the poster there as a prop, because, a lot of us, especially a lot of younger scholars, feel a little more comfortable having a prop to refer to. Mm-hmm. So, they could be extremely valuable. They're often treated kind of like the backwater of the conference, but they don't have to be. Yeah. And I think that might be that idea that they're not the backwater, they're not necessarily a backwater, might be kind of what made you think about this topic. I think you were kind of going along ideas of how to make them a little more exciting, a little more interesting, a little more of a main draw, not something you do between sessions that you were otherwise going to visit.
Right. And, one of the ways you can actually do that is, and I don't know if this was intentional because of the conference hall layout, but sometimes you go to, say, a smaller conference, or I've been to the SAAs before where the posters were in an entirely different room and like a room of their own. So you had to purposely go there. But these posters were in between a couple high kind of traffic areas and the exhibition hall, which everybody goes to. So you almost had to walk through the posters in some circumstances just to get to the exhibition hall or to go somewhere else. So they kind of put the posters in your face, so to speak. So they were right there. But also,
I've never seen that before. I think every conference I've ever been to, they were off in their own kind of off in the corner room.
Yeah. And that's still, like I said, that still happens. I think this just might have been a factor of the layout that it just kind of worked out that way. And I have noticed the SAA is starting to do more, and some other conferences. I think SHA did at one time, the Society of Historic Archaeology. They put the posters in the exhibit hall with the exhibitors. So it was all kind of right there. But also, you see all different kinds of things. Another thing that you said that interested me is I've only seen this at smaller conferences these days, where they don't really have a place to hang a poster, is the poster board setup, like the trifold poster board thing. That's kind of what you were alluding to. But most of these big conferences, they actually have board like pin-up boards brought in. You have to bring your own push pins and stuff, but they bring in these things that you can actually pin a larger poster to. And some of these posters can be 4 or 5 feet tall by 6 or 7 feet wide. I mean, they're enormous. They're actually really huge posters. So
yeah, you were telling me at an earlier episode of the podcast, you were talking about somebody who silk screens or prints on silk their posters.
Yeah,
right?
that was going to be my first way that posters have come forward technologically, was to mention that, because the first time I saw that was about 5 or 6 years ago, actually. It was only one person that did it. And now there's a company online called Spoonflower. And they actually, I don't know if they're embracing the whole conference poster thing, but they will print anything on fabric. Like, you send them a design, they will print it on fabric. And it's starting to get around. You have to do it like a month ahead of time. You can't be working on your poster the week before the conference and take it to Kinko's. Well, you can do that. But if you want to have it done on silkscreen and not carry a massive poster tube through the airport, then just do this. And there was actually a woman that I met her at one of like the after parties that day, and she was wearing this it looked like a scarf kind of thing, like a silk scarf, but it was her poster. She had it wrapped around her neck and kind of tied in the front, and it was her poster. And she had the idea to maybe start collecting posters that people do that way and like make them into a quilt.
Well, how many of us have ever felt like our research was tied around our neck?
I know, right? Literally tied around her neck. But that's like the biggest advancements we've seen in posters since the really wide format color printing, honestly. And other than that, the way that they're conveying information hasn't really changed. You see it change basically from person to person. Some people really, I really don't understand where they're coming with the poster. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm a little more visual kind of person, but you see some of those posters and it is just all text all the time. Like It is just and really small text, because they basically wrote a 20-page paper and then crammed it into these little blocks on a poster.
Yeah, I've seen that before. That's awful, because nobody wants to stand there in front of a table or in front of the backdrop and try to read things at arm's length. No, that's not.
And here's Exactly. And this gets us to kind of what the reason why we have posters are, because we could start this episode with saying, we should just get rid of the poster. The poster's useless anymore. It's on paper, blah, blah, blah. But I'm actually not going to make that argument. I'm going to say, what are the reason that, at least that I think, that we have posters? I don't know historically what the reason for posters was. I think personally it was to get a little bit more research out there because somebody didn't have room in the schedule for the papers. So they said, well, I can put all this on like a poster board and just present it that way. My guess is it probably started something like that. And now it's kind of a thing. But I honestly don't know. If anybody knows the history and maybe what conference first started doing posters and then how that developed, then please let us know. I'm actually pretty interested in that question. But I think now that the whole point of a poster session is really to have intimate access to the researcher themselves. If you're listening to a paper or some sort of presentation or even a forum, you probably don't have a lot of opportunity to interact and ask questions and give feedback or something like that. But if you're looking at a poster, then the person who generally was either the lead researcher or at least part of the team is standing right there, and you can ask them questions. They usually have about a 2-hour session at the SAAs, and you can stand there and ask them questions. Well, when they only have 2 hours, and the poster sessions are actually pretty crowded these days, a lot of people are going through there. If they have to spend 5 to 10 minutes talking to each person, just to tell them and explain to them what the poster is about, that's just wasted time. Now you've reduced the number of people you can talk to, because every single time you talk to someone, you've got to give them the same pitch if they weren't standing there listening to it to begin with. And that just seems inefficient to me. So if the point of the poster is to convey information, show this is what our question was, this is how we tried to solve it, and these are our conclusions. Those are the 3 parts of any bit of research: questions, methods, conclusions, and then further research. So maybe there's like 4 parts. So, and that's what most of those posters did, but some of them did it better than others. And, like I said, I'm a little bit more into the more graphically presented ones that are just like leading you visually from one spot to the next, like a well-crafted advertisement would or something like that. And there's not a lot of, really detailed information. As far as I'm concerned, the detailed information should come from the person standing there. If I want to know more about how did you do this, they should just be able to tell me, versus I have to sit there and read 6 paragraphs of really tiny text and get up close to the poster where there's 10 other people trying to crowd around it. So yeah, I did see some really good posters at this conference from a 2-dimensional poster standpoint, where this one guy, he took up the whole space. I swear to God, his poster was 8 feet wide and probably 5 feet tall. It was enormous, and it was absolutely huge. And it wasn't just full of text. He had actually very little text on there and a lot of pictures and graphs. And it was almost like, you know what it is, Paul? It's like an infographic. Infographics are great. They convey a ton of information graphically. And wow, I can't believe I didn't think about this when we were talking about setting this up. An infographic would be a great poster, because those are actually really difficult to do well. And it conveys a ton of information in a very easy way. So maybe that's the end of the podcast. Infographics.
Yeah, well, what you actually used the word efficiency while you're talking there, and certainly, of course, there are going to be better posters and worse posters, just like there are better presenters and worse presenters in the other sessions that you go to at any conference. People that are more skilled, people who have taken more time, people that, for any of a variety of reasons, do that particular kind of communication better than others do. But anyhow, back to efficiency. We've talked a lot about on this podcast about efficiency with data collection, using different computer and electronic tools to make for better quality collection of data. Well, I'm thinking that what we're looking at here, what you're discussing, is efficiency of presentation, the far end of it. And again, we're stuck in this paper paradigm with the poster session. It's right there in the name, poster. Yeah, maybe we ought to start looking at what ways we can enhance that presentation with various technological tools and still have it be within the format of a poster session. But there be all sorts of different ways that we can augment, expand, provide ancillary data alongside what's presented there hanging on that backdrop.
Right.
This might be the whole next segment of this particular podcast, but I think that that's what we're both thinking is the direction that things ought to go. Though I have no real idea what that direction might be, and in kinds of any specific examples. I've got one thing that I'll mention here coming up.
Yeah.
But nothing in particular, again, because I haven't explored this particularly closely.
In the last couple of minutes of this segment, let's throw out some ideas, wacky or not, that ways that basically, let's take the word poster out of it, but ways that information could be presented digitally in the sort of forum that a poster is typically in. So lots of people, loud, crowded in, maybe 100 at a time, but also something you can easily transport. Like when that session's done, in a poster session, you just basically pull your push pins out, roll your poster up, or tie it around your neck, and walk out the door. So we need something that A, conveys a ton of information, B, does not rely on you being able to like really hear it unless you're going to provide headphones, and C, is easily installed and easily transportable, easily installed and easily removed. So it has to meet those three qualifications to kind of fit the current model, because if we change stuff too much, they're never going to go for it. But there might be completely different, like I can imagine there's going to be VR and AR sessions at the SAAs in 5 years. Maybe 5 years is a little close for the SAAs, maybe 10 years. But otherwise, I think, those are the qualifications. The first one I'll mention is TVs. It seems like a logical thing. You've got flat screen TVs. A lot of them have the USB drive on the back that if you have some sort of simple presentation like a PDF, you can actually just plug it straight into the TV and load it up through the TV's interface. Now, I like that idea from a paper saving standpoint, especially if the conference hotel just has a bunch of flat screen TVs on rolly dolly things, or rollable stands. And I remember seeing something like that. I want to say it was at the SHAs a few years ago, maybe in Dallas a couple years ago or something like that. They had kind of a TV poster session. There was only about 20 of them, I think, but it was on TVs. And I don't remember really seeing any video. I want to say it was more of an auto rotating slideshow kind of thing. And the person was standing there to explain what you were seeing. So I like that. But I think it has some limitations, which we can talk about in the next segment. What are some ideas, if you could think of, Paul, that meet some of those requirements?
Well, you'd mentioned infographics, and many of the better infographics will give you the top line of what the points are that they're making, and they'll give you some statistics, some numbers, and then there'll be footnotes. Little footnotes that you can go down to the bottom, and they'll link to the sources of the data that they use to show whatever it is they're showing up in the infographic. That I wouldn't necessarily, advocate for doing footnotes all over your poster session, though that might be something you can do. But certainly being able to separate to some extent the presentation from the source data, being able to give easy access to that source data at the same time, whether it's through a web link, whether it's through some AR, whether it's through some extra video, something depends, really what it is you're trying to present. I think that being able to separate those two concerns is going to be more and more useful as we go forward for people who are doing poster sessions. And there I use that word poster again, but you know what I mean.
I think we'll still call them poster sessions. There you go. Because it's the poster is going to end up being the type of presentation, right? You're conveying, like we said early on, you're conveying information in a certain way and in an accessible way, where you can talk to the person. Maybe that's how we'll define poster. We're going to go to break here real soon, and I'll just throw out some ideas that we're going to talk about in the next segment. Obviously, augmented reality, which is something I'm actually going to latch onto pretty quickly here because it's something we can do now. And then virtual reality, where that meets the requirement of easy setup and easy teardown, because you could just have the file as long as they'll tell you ahead of time, listen, we have this kind of VR rig and you just bring your file and this is what it's hooked up to, throw it in there. And then, I'm imagining 3 or 4 of them at each station where people could just come put on the VR rig and then interact with your environment. So
I'm going to throw one other thing out here because it could be incorporated into various technologies for presenting it. But a poster session, as opposed to a regular talk, which is very linear, listen to the person speaking, or a video or a slideshow, any of which are, advance to the next scene, advance to the next slide. A poster session doesn't necessarily have to be so linear. And that, and that you can move through what's being presented in different directions, again, depending on how it's been presented to you. But that nonlinearity might present great opportunities for somebody to augment their data in really interesting ways.
Right. There you go. Okay. Well, we will take a break and come back on the other side of this and really kind of dive into a couple of these ideas that I think could be done at any time right now. And we can start changing how people access this information. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. So back in a second. Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, British Columbia has launched a professional online master's program built by and for cultural heritage management practitioners. The thesis-based MA or coursework-only graduate certificate both offer integrated study of HRM's ethical, legal, business, and research priorities. The MA thesis requirements comply with registered professional archaeologists and other jurisdictional standards. This is the perfect graduate program for bachelor-level CRM practitioners ready to make a career commitment, but not ready to relocate or quit their job. We have advertised for SFU in the past, and we had a long podcast about SFU's program, and I highly recommend it. If you're looking to get a graduate degree in cultural resource management, this is the way to go. Apply today at www.sfu.ca/archaeology. That's www.sfu.ca/archaeology to take your career to new levels today. Hey, podcast fans and digital archaeologists. Have you heard about WildNote? It's a data collection app that works online or offline on your smartphone or tablet, iOS or Android. It allows you to collect field data easily, manage data efficiently, and generate data reports and site records effortlessly. We have a growing list of state site forms built in for your use and some generic forms that will work anywhere. Check out the shovel testing and photograph forms. You can get a free all-access 30-day trial today by going to wildnoteapp.com. That's wildnoteapp.com for your free 30-day trial. Now back to the show. All right, we're back with episode 80 of the Archaeotech podcast, and we are talking about the future of conference poster presentations. And when we left the last segment, we were throwing out some ideas. And one idea that I wrote down that I didn't get to mention, only because I'm really thinking about one particular thing, was I wrote down projectors or Xbox Kinect style integration. And the one thing that I'm thinking about, there was a video going around for a while on like Facebook and other social media sites. And then I actually got to play with one about 3 months ago at this museum in Southern California. And it's basically Xbox Kinect was kind of one of the first, I guess, widely available commercial, like digital interaction sort of systems. So basically it scanned your whole body, and it was a thing that sat on the TV, and you could move around, and it sensed those movements and relayed those movements to something on screen. Well, Xbox allowed people to basically hack that thing and use it for whatever they want. So utilizing those movements. And one of the things I saw that was really cool early on was somebody had basically shined a projector and an Xbox Kinect system straight down on basically a sandbox. And they said, this level is going to be one color, like on a terrain map. It's going to be, let's say, green. And if you pile up the sand and make it closer to the projector, closer to the Xbox Kinect, it's going to turn this color like mountains would look on a terrain map. And if you dig a hole deeper than this, then it's going to fill up with water and be blue. And in the particular one I got to play with, if you held your hand and shaded an area, then it started raining right there and filled up with water. And it was just a really cool way to interact with a different medium. And I was thinking, man, if you could have something set up like that, to where people could actually, I don't know what kind of data you would have or what point you'd be trying to convey, but having people interact with what you're trying to display there would be really neat. It would be very particular to the type of thing that you're doing, but I don't have any experience with programming for that or how that would work. And I think the learning curve is probably what's going to put most people out. And then, posters are intended to be a relatively cheap affair, aside from the $100 or so it's going to take you to print the damn thing. They really just take research and then putting that together. So the rest of these things that we're going to talk about, and really the last two here, which is augmented reality and virtual reality, are going to take some further setup. But I think the learning curve on that kind of stuff is going to really start coming down. And I think we'll talk about VR first, because we don't have as much to say on that, because it is something that really very few people can actually create something for and do it successfully, because it is expensive. There's a learning curve. You need special software, all those sorts of things. But could you imagine, Paul, a virtual reality poster session? And I was mentioning this at the end of the last segment, but I just want to bring it up again, where people are basically just putting these rigs on, and maybe they have hand, manipulation things as well. And if you had, say, I'm trying to think, if you were like trying to study maybe some pottery types or something like that, somebody could actually pick something up and manipulate it in their hands and and check it out, bring it up close to their face. The kind of things that either for technical reasons you couldn't get on a plane, or for cultural reasons you're not allowed. I mean, they've been repatriated, they've been given back to whoever they belong to, or they're just too delicate and fragile to leave the lab setting or wherever they're curated. But you could actually have someone interacting with these objects at a quote poster session. So I don't know, maybe you'd have that in conjunction with a poster. So here's the information. Now here, play with the things.
Okay, here's one thing very concrete that I can think of that you would use VR for, and it wouldn't be especially difficult because we have it already with Google Cardboard and Google Expeditions. Is, you know, so much of our archaeology is landscape archaeology, or is at least contextualized within a particular landscape, even if you're doing very site-based archaeology, and being able to show that without having to have, you know, a million photographs pinned up to that backdrop, by providing a VR headset that the viewer could then pop on quickly and look around to get a sense of how that site or how that landscape appear from there. That's stuff that's, you know, from off the shelf technology. Anybody could produce that very quickly and very easily, and that'd be useful. Again, to contextualize the project, if it's something that's site or landscape based, and, you know, so much of our work is that, you know, I think that is extremely helpful. I've said it before, maybe on the podcast, I don't know, but when I am in the field, when I used to be in the field in the Near East, we'd go on these site tours, and there was absolutely nothing that was more valuable for me for understanding somebody else's site. I may have read, you know, every dig report about that site and thought I knew the site inside out and backwards. But until I actually get there and set my feet on that place, I never really had a sense of what it looked and felt like and smelled like and sounded like and everything. Well, this, I think, would go a long way toward that. And that would be a very simple, very useful bit of extra information, again, with off-the-shelf software and off-the-shelf hardware.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
And that's something you can't even do at a talk, right? You wouldn't be able to hand everybody their VR headsets at the talk to show what that site is that you're presenting. But you certainly could do that pretty easily at that poster session.
Yeah, and that's an excellent segue into the augmented reality conversation, because I think that's one of the key elements of a poster session is the level of technology needed to interact with it. Right now, the level of technology needed to interact with a poster session is sight. Like, you need to be able to see. Sorry to people who can't see. Poster sessions are going to be a little bit useless for you because nobody makes them. And that might be a consideration, actually, you know, with a virtual reality setup, or at least with an audio setup, you know, component. Maybe somebody who is unsighted could be able to, you know, to be able to interact with that. But either way, the basic technology needed to be able to see a poster is sight. So if this is the kind of thing that's going to take off, we need to start with the basic technologies that people have access to. And right now, virtual reality is not something everyone has access to. So if you were to have a virtual reality session or a virtual reality poster, you would probably have to provide the glasses. You know, we're not all currently wearing some sort of thing that allows us to virtually or augmented reality way interact with the world. And not everybody has a set of VR glasses. They're coming down in price, but people just don't own them, let alone carry them around with them to a conference. So in order for that to work, I'm not saying it's not impossible, but in order for that to work, the session or the conference itself would have to provide the VR headsets to each poster area, which means I think that'd be the kind of thing that they could do on if they were granted that kind of money, and maybe start out with a small session and say, you know, we're going to have 10 presenters, you know, every 2 or 3 hours or something, because that's the amount of gear that we have. And then we'll rotate those through, something like that. It would start small, but I think it's something they could do, but it would start small. But again, it's access to the technology. So I think augmented reality, which I'll just break this down for anybody who doesn't know what the hell we're talking about. Virtual reality is a total immersive experience. You go into another world that's virtual. It's not reality. It's virtual. It's made to look like reality in some cases. In some cases, it's not. But you're totally immersed in that world. Augmented reality is using some sort of device between your eyes and the real world, and having those objects project themselves basically through that device on the real world. So you can put animals on your desk or something that are running around, or, something like that. You can display things that when you look around the device, they're actually not there in the real world. So that's augmented reality. It's augmenting your current reality, which I think augmented reality, honestly, is the way of the future. We're already doing that a little bit. The minute we started having smartphones that had cameras on the back, people were creating applications where you could just hold up the phone because it knows where it's at in space, and it knows what direction it's looking because it has GPS and it has a electronic compass. And then the camera basically allows it to see the world, and it knows where it's at, and then it will display on the screen what you're looking at. Basically, it will define things. I had one probably 6-7 years ago that would show me mountain peaks off in the distance because it knew exactly where those peaks were, and it would just label them, and that's augmented reality. And that's really cool. The only reason that we're not fully immersed into augmented reality right now is because nobody's found a way to make basically some sort of glasses that would work with the computing power and the battery power to essentially wear all day and layer whatever you want to see on top of that, whether it's people's social media profiles, Yelp reviews of restaurants, directions to where you're going, whatever the case may be.
The name of the person that you're having the conversation with. That's what 90% of us really want more than anything else.
Oh, Jesus. We'll never again have to have those conversations where you're just hoping someone else comes up and introduces themselves so you can remember what this person's name is. Oh, Jesus. It's like the second Seinfeld reference in 40 minutes. So the first one was up there.
I'm showing my age.
I love it. So augmented reality, man. I mean, this seems like the way to go, because let's look at interaction here. There's at least two ways I can think of that conference goers could interact with an augmented reality enhanced poster. So you're still dealing with a flat 2D poster here, but it's got augmented reality elements. And one of those ways is the presenter could honestly just have some tablets sitting there, because tablets are cheap, and they probably have 3 or 4 of them at their university that they could talk somebody into letting them bring to the conference. And then you basically turn on a special app on the tablet. And this is actually going to be my app of the day app, but you turn on a special app on the tablet, you hold it up to the poster, and then certain elements on the poster become interactive in a way. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but they become interactive, and it makes the poster come alive. And the more of those devices you have, the more people that can simultaneously interact with your poster. But the cool thing is, it doesn't have to be just your devices. If you have a phone and you happen to have that app, or you have internet access and you could download that free app, whatever app is allowing you to do this, there's a number of them on the market, then anybody can just walk by, and then with that app, they could just point it at your poster and then interact with it without even talking to you. Maybe you're busy or something like that. So I don't know. Paul, have you had much experience with augmented reality stuff in the age of smartphones?
Not deep experience, but yeah, we do use it here, and I'm worried that I'm going to scoop your app here. Okay, no, I'm not going to scoop your app. So our listeners know we've got a chat session going on the side here. So,
nice.
So I see what you're doing. Anyhow, at the school here where I work, we've done this with the middle school in a number of cases. Where students will do a project, and they'll record videos of themselves explaining some part of the project. And so we'll have an entire grade, there'll be 100 posters up on the walls of our lobby, and you can go with a particular app, and it'll key in. It knows each one of the photographs that the students created, and you hold it up to, student A's photograph, drawing, whatever it is they did, and then it'll automatically pop up a video or other images or something related to that their project, basically. So we can have 2 layers of the students' projects presented in the lobby space at the same time. The program that we used for that was one called Erasma, and that got bought out a couple of years ago by Hewlett Packard. It's now called HP Reveal. I don't think we've used this program in a couple of years, but I was just looking at it before before we started recording. And I can see from a couple of years ago that it still has a memory of when my son did a presentation on the Antikythera mechanism. It's got his key photo in there, so it looks like it preserved the data from when it used to be Erasma. And basically, yeah. So you set it up. We've used it, like I said, for middle school projects. My boss here, when he got married, he and his new wife, they went to, that sounds like he had a previous wife. That's not what I mean. They went to Tanzania. Wow. And so he had photographs from safaris and from climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. And And some of the photographs we had there was a photo exhibit that they did upstairs in the business office of the school, and printed out photos. And a few of them had keys. So you'd hold up your phone with Aurasma on it, and it would recognize that particular photo and then show a video clip that he took at about the same time, of lions walking around the Jeep.
Nice.
So, it was a nice way to add some extra data. And it's simple enough, again, that our middle schoolers could use it. We had to do all the setup with the back end of it, the accounts and that, but none of the tech is all taken care of through the app. And so that's an easy way for somebody to provide extra information. So you could have, for example, a static photo on on your poster of an object and pop up a 3-dimensional rendering or a video or additional information about that object, things that you don't want to clutter up on the photo, but could present then to any viewer that was so interested very easily on their cell phone or on that tablet that you provide there on the table.
Nice. I love that. And the only limitation to that stuff is having the application that requires you to do that. And then, of course, if you set up a whole bunch of stuff through a certain company where you need that application for it to work, and then maybe they go under or they change how they're doing things, then all the stuff you created is now unsupported. What I personally think is going to happen, I think we're still a few years away from this, but what I personally think is going to happen is that it's going to be one of those things that's built into the camera apps on phones. A good example of that is QR codes. QR codes have been around for a long time, but you just don't see them. You see them everywhere, but you really don't see anybody using them because most people don't know that you used to have to actually download a special application to be able to read that QR code. I had one for a long time called Red Laser, and it's just the kind of thing that I had on my phone. I downloaded it when I wanted to check out QR codes. And then it was just always kind of on there, and they hadn't supported it in years, but it always still worked. Well, now the latest versions of the iPhone, and I know a bunch of Android phones, you just turn on the camera and it recognizes that you're looking at a QR code. You don't have to hit anything. It just accesses the QR code and does whatever the QR code tells it to do. So if you're going to a website or if it's adding contact information, whatever that case may be, it's just going to do that. Which is great. So when they build in augmented reality, and I think Apple, I don't know where Samsung sits on this, but I think Apple's actually really close because the iPhone 10 and iOS 11, a major component of the keynote presentation when they were announcing these things was augmented reality on the iPhone, and how the processing speeds were finally getting to the point where they're going to start focusing on this kind of stuff. And they had this huge augmented reality display that they were doing on stage when they were announcing this. So if they're embracing augmented reality, and if the world decides to embrace augmented reality, then I think it will just be built into camera apps and all these. Unfortunately, that means most of these companies that are creating augmented reality apps that you have to download, one of the ones I'm going to talk about, and it sounds like you're going to talk about one too. Unfortunately, they're either going to go out of business if that's all they do, or they're going to have to step up what they offer from an augmented reality standpoint. You know what I mean? Instead of just basic augmented reality, it's going to be like, well, you can do all these things now, and stuff like that. So yeah. Anyway, I think I want to do an augmented reality poster for the next session, for the next conference. I've never actually done a poster before, but I'd love to do something and have like 3 or 4 iPads sitting there and have instructions for how to download the app that you could use to view that stuff. We could do one for the podcast network where, everybody usually has headphones on them too these days, or I could have some available, and you could point it at like a show icon and then hear a snippet of that show while you're pointing it at the icon or something like that. I think that'd be great.
Again, with that HP reveal, that'd be pretty easy to do. And I'm guessing with your app of the day, it's probably not that difficult either.
No.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned QR codes. I mean, they are, they were kind of a buzz a few years back. You saw them on bus stops and in magazine ads and whatnot, and they're less popular now, but they still are a convenient way of providing a quick link for things, right? So if you have extra data that you want to convey, or you want to provide access to without cluttering up your poster, you do that. Put the top level flashier stuff up on that poster, and then bury your links down as tiny URLs and or QR codes, so that the person that actually works in an adjacent field to you can click and link and have access onto your data, and you don't have to waste the real estate of that poster on these things. So that's right. A good way of just making your information a little denser and also separating the presentation data from some of the stuff behind it, without totally hiding that other stuff.
Indeed. And the way I saw, I was actually paying attention to this time. I was looking to see how many QR codes I saw on posters, and I didn't see hardly any on posters this year at the SAAs, because there was a couple of years where it was on every poster, which was great, because if you knew how to access the QR code, then it would usually take you to either the person's like university website, or if they had a personal website, it would take you there. Where often, if they did it right, you could actually download basically the paper that spawned the poster, or you could download the poster actually, and that was great. So, well, I think this conversation is leading directly into the apps that we want to talk about to do this. So let's end this segment and come back for the app of the day segment in just a minute. Are you tired of the webinars and training offered by the big organizations not being free for members and not really covering what we need? Team Black has the answers. Check out arccert.black/main for our upcoming webinar schedule. All of our webinars happen once a month, and seating is limited. Learn everything from field tech basics to drones to digital workflows. We have more classes coming online every month. Classes are always 1 hour and cost just $20. Classes like building a CV and getting a job are always free. That's right, we'll help you get a job, then we'll be here when you want to level up your skills. If you are a professional subscriber to the APN at arcpodnet.com/members, then you get all of Team Black's offerings for free as part of your membership. We have Team Black memberships coming that will give the same for the APN. So $20 a month gets you all the APN swag and extras, plus free training from Team Black. So check out arccert.black for more information and level up your skill set today. That's arccert.black. Interested in archaeology? Want to hear from experts in the field about the latest discoveries and interpretations? Check out the Archaeology Show every other Saturday and let hosts Chris Webster and April Camp Whitaker take you deeper into the story. Check out the Archaeology Show at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeology and subscribe, rate, and comment on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and the Google Music Store. That's www.arcpodnet.com/archaeology. Now back to the show. Okay, welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 80, and we have been talking about the future of poster presentations, and my app of the day leads basically right into that, because unless I find something better, if I do actually create a poster for the SAAs in 2019 that is riddled with augmented reality, then I'll probably use this service. And the one I'm going to talk about is called Layar, actually. They have a really clever way. It's layer, like you're layering something on top of reality, but it's LAYAR. And then the little app actually has the AR highlighted as their icon for augmented reality. So
sneaky.
I know, right? So, but the cool thing about this is if you go to their website, and we'll link to that in the show notes, they have a bunch of examples up there. Some frustratingly work and some don't work, but you download the AR, the Layer app, which you need for these things to work, and it shows right up. You don't have to click any extra buttons. The minute you open it, it turns on the camera and says scan something. And when you scan something, it will scan it. And I think the layer icon has to be on the thing that you're scanning. That's one of the things you'd have to put on your poster. And then once people scan that, now they don't have to look at it anymore. They just can look at the poster and then interact with stuff. But basically, once you scan that, now things that you designated, spaces that you designated on the visual medium, whatever it is, it could be a poster, it can be a magazine. I saw business cards, which was really cool, but you've got to put the little layer icon on your business card, which, I don't really mind too much, but I wish you could do it without it. But once it's on there, I mean, you could hand somebody your business card and it says, scan this with the layer app. And then when you do that, it could show up with an audio clip or a video clip or something like that, or pop up a little web browser and show your web page all right there as they're pointing a camera at your business card. It's actually pretty cool. So you can set up anything like that. They have a charge, and again, just go check out their website, which are linked in the show notes. So they basically charge, like if you want something to be active, because all that media that you're actually adding to the augmented reality, all the media that you're adding there, it's obviously not stored on the poster. It's not stored on the business card. It's stored in the cloud server somewhere that's owned by somebody. So when their app scans the thing, that video and that audio is basically being downloaded to your device, and you're interacting with it through that system. So that's one consideration you'd have to take into account if you're going to do this at a poster session. There actually has to be internet available. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So if you're using tablets that are not internet ready, or using tablets and you didn't pay the $25 it costs for the hotel Wi-Fi, then it's not going to work. So keep that in mind. A lot of hotels, like the exhibit hall or where the posters are, is buried deep within the bowels of the hotel, and you can't even get a cell signal out there. So that's all stuff you're going to have to take into account. And hopefully you've got content on your poster that can work without the augmented reality working. And there might be some, and I'm going to do some research on this, and maybe we'll talk about it again later on. I'm going to look at some that maybe you can have the information actually stored locally on your device. So when somebody looks at it, it pulls from the local storage rather than cloud storage. But I'm not really sure if that's a thing that people are providing right now. But if you check out the Layer app, they have some geo layers, they call it, which are pretty cool. So if you're in a new area, you can turn it on and basically scan around and find out where, ATMs are, or grocery stores, or, points of interest, things like that. And it will show you, based on where you're pointing the device, where these things are. And you can create geo layers for these things as well. If you want something in your local town that doesn't have anything, you can create that. So it's pretty cool. This is pretty basic. I'll probably have more information if I decide to actually put something together and start playing around with it. But I'm interested to hear, because I meant to say this at the end of the last segment, I'm interested to hear if anybody's done something related to archaeology or presentations related to augmented reality, or I've seen some virtual reality stuff, but I honestly haven't seen, I don't think, any augmented reality stuff. And I'm interested to see if anybody's considering possibly doing this for the SAAs or any other conference for that matter. Or if you've done something in the past and what kind of experiences you had with that. So that's pretty much all I've got. And again, send us your comments and feedback on this, because I'm really interested to see where this can go. So
now, Layer sounds a lot like that Erasma HP reveal that I was mentioning before.
Yeah.
In terms of, it keys on a particular image. I don't know, or at least back when we used it here at school, Erasma was not able to, it didn't know where you were in the world. It didn't have that geo layer, the georeference part to it. But they may have added it in since. I don't know. I haven't looked at it. But yeah, it'd be kind of cool to see, for the purposes of a poster, since that's what this episode is about. It'd be interesting to see what the differences, what the various strengths and weaknesses are. And there must be some other apps out there too, I would think. Did you mention which platforms Layer runs on?
I'm pretty sure it's all of them. Yeah. Android and Apple, I think that's on their website. So, which is really great. Layer was actually the very first, when I was mentioning those mountain peaks, I didn't want to give it away, but that was the very first augmented reality app I downloaded probably 6 or 7 years ago for one of my older iPhones. And it was a little dicey, but it still worked. And I'm glad they stayed in business. I'm glad they stuck with it and kind of came up with this new model of doing stuff like that with other people and their projects. So I'm glad they've made it go, because I think we're going to find out in the future, when we look back historically on these things, who was there first. And I think these guys are going to be one of the ones that are going to be noted for being first and sticking with it and really kind of changing how we interact with the world. So I like it.
That interaction is, that you use that word. That's one part that we didn't explore too much in the regular segment of this episode. A lot of the AR that I've seen is kind of stand back and look at, but we may have, as things advance, more ways to interact then with the objects beyond just staring at a 3D rendering of it sitting on your tabletop, which is still pretty cool. But but there may be other ways that we get to interact with the materials that are shown to us. But regardless, they're all different ways to enhance what's presented on the poster by bringing out different visual media and separating presentation and data, if you so desire. Again, I say this a lot of times that it's going to be really cool to see what happens in the next couple of years, but I really think that these are going to become more and more mainstream as we go. One
final comment on this, because you just said this, and you're like, oh, it's cool to see like a 3D 3D representation of something, like a 3D print or something. And I'm thinking, man, that's not even that old a technology. And we're already like, all right, what's next? It's like, that's cool and all, but what's next?
Bored.
I hope Bernard Means from the Virtual Curation Laboratory is actually not listening to this episode. Because we don't mean it. 3D printed stuff is still pretty cool. But what's a better way to interact? Because with 3D printed objects, you still have to get that on a plane and bring all that stuff with you. Like you can't get around that, So anyway, yeah. So what do you got for your app of the day segment, Paul?
Okay, so since this is a podcast, I listened to quite a few podcasts. I listened to a number of archaeology podcasts, a couple of guitar podcasts, some politics, and horror stories, which I really like. Nice. So I've been using the Apple Podcast app for years and years now, and I've just never had any real interest in using anything else because it did the job for me. And I never had any particular problems. A lot of people have a lot of complaints, a lot of them very valid, about the Apple Podcast app, its limitations. I wasn't feeling particularly limited because basically I listen to things in sequence and I don't have any special needs for organizing and such, but something, I don't even know what, irked me with the podcast app a couple weeks ago. And so I looked at a few different ones and I did a few Google searches, best podcast apps 2018. And one of the ones that was consistently highly ranked was Pocket Casts. And, so I downloaded that. This was a pay one. I think it was $3.99. Ouch, $4 is going to kill me. Some of the other very highly rated ones are subscriptions. And I figured that, if I wasn't going to like it, I'd rather be out, a one-time charge rather than have to cancel a subscription. Right. So I downloaded Pocket Casts. It's available on iOS, on Android, and it also ties into a web player. So if you're just stuck on a web browser, you can also listen to your podcast there. I exported my playlists, the subscriptions rather, from iTunes on my old subscriptions that I was listening to on the Apple app, and then re-imported them into Pocket Casts, and I've been using it since. And I got to say, I really like it. It's not radically different. It's just cleaned up. The main interface for it is podcasts, and it's just a grid of all your different podcasts, and you can sort it either by date of when you added it in, or you can sort it alphabetically, or you can customize and just sort them how you want. So I am boring. I do it all alphabetically, but if I really wanted to be extra anal, I could sort them by the types of podcasts. I'd have, all my archaeology ones up first, and then the politics ones, and then the guitar ones, and then those horror story ones down at the bottom. If, so whenever I'm in the mood for a horror story, you know where to look. But then there are other ways that you can view them. You can view by new releases, which are things you haven't listened to yet. You can view by things that are in progress, and you can also do different filters, which would allow you to customize it based on any of a number of different things. You can put different icons in: playing state, status, episode type, if it's audio or video, release date. You can tell it to only include certain podcasts or include them all. You can star them, you can sort them oldest, newest to oldest, however you want. So it allows a lot more customizability in terms of the sorting and organizing than is available in the Apple Podcast app. And the other thing that I've been really liking with it is you can go into it, and this is nothing special to, particular to this podcast app. This is pretty standard for every app nowadays, is you can go through and change the settings, the playback speed. You can set it, click the big button and it increments 1 time, 1.5 time, 2 times, or you can do pluses and minuses and go to 1.1 or, 1.4 is about where things start, above 1.4, 1.5 often sounds a little funny to me. 1.4 usually sounds pretty good. You can trim silence. So if there are long pauses,
I like that.
Yeah. It gets rid of them. And there's what's really been helpful for me is volume boost, which it takes the mid-range where people's voices tend to be and gives out a little bit of a goose and makes them clearer. I normally listen to podcasts when I'm walking to and from work, which is about 2.5 mile walk across town. And it makes it a lot clearer so I can hear what people are saying over and above the regular city noises. It hasn't revolutionized the way I listen to podcasts, but it just made it slightly more pleasant than it was before. And I've run through a whole bunch now. You can bring in podcasts from all the usual locations, from Apple, from Stitcher, from, who else?
All the places.
Yeah. Google Play, from all the places, all the regular places. So it's very compatible. And I Googled it just before we started recording to get the, I hit Pocket Cast. I didn't remember if it was pocketcast.com or whatnot. It's actually Shifty Jelly. And we'll put that link in the show notes. But it may not be that for long, because when I Googled it, it says top stories. Pocket Cast acquired by NPR.
Oh, geez.
From The Verge 3 hours ago.
Weird.
So, you were mentioning with some of these AR programs, whether or not they're going to be around for a while. This is, this is not your own data. This is listening to somebody else's podcast. It's a conduit. But I'm guessing with NPR backing it, they're going to put some skin in the game and keep it around for a while. Yeah,
that's pretty crazy. I'm kind of encouraged by NPR buying something that could actually give them some other revenue streams. You know what I mean? So yeah, maybe that means one less pledge drive out of the year. That's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen.
Nice. I like it. I'm a little shocked that you haven't hit the 2X range yet, though, Paul. I mean, I know that's what you listen to. Man. What
app do you use by preference?
So I use Downcast. It was one of the first podcast apps I downloaded probably 6 or 7 years ago, and the guy has just made really good incremental improvements through the years, and to the point where it now has iCloud integration. So I can have Downcast as a desktop app on my computer and on my phone. And when I listen to something on one side, since it's got iCloud integration, it updates the playlist and knows that I listened to it, in the other location. So also it's got a pretty good Apple Watch app, so I can control the podcast, which is really good when I'm driving, because I don't want to reach over to the phone and unlock it and advance a show for some reason, or if I want to skip it, that's stuff you just shouldn't be doing in the car. But I can pretty easily with my left hand, where my watch is on the steering wheel, just reach over and hit the next button or something like that, because it's always up right there on my watch, and I could just move on to the next one, or go to the I go to the playlist and check those out. So yeah, that's what I use, and probably something that I might talk about in a future podcast is called Minicast, which is basically sending podcasts to your Apple Watch, because that's been kind of a notorious thing for the Apple Watch. Is Apple doesn't even support their podcast app on the Apple Watch. Like, you can control the podcast once it's playing through Apple Podcast app, but you can't download podcasts to the Apple Watch and use it without the phone, which is something people are looking for. I mean, Apple gave the ability to use the Apple Watch without the phone with the Series 3 and have a data plan and all that stuff and work independently, but you still can't really get anything on there. You can do Apple Music, and that's pretty much it, so it's kind of useless in that respect. But anyway, Pocket Cast sounds like a really good app, and however you listen to the podcast network. One other thing I want to mention that you talked about with the Pocket Cast is the ability to basically normalize, is what it's called, the audio. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I hope listeners to these shows have. It's the kind of thing where you probably don't recognize it until it's pointed out. But I took a pretty serious audio engineering course last fall in an attempt to really increase how our, make our stuff sound better. And one of the things you notice once you take a course like that is exactly why you're riding the volume knob on other podcasts when they're either talking quietly or somebody on the show is louder than another person. A basic way to fix that, and if there's any other podcasters listening, compression. It takes the highs and brings them down and the lows and brings them up and basically levels everything. You can really screw it up if you're not doing it right. But if you do it right, and then you match loudness and you do all that stuff at the end, you do some mastering at the end, you can fix those sorts of things, because Paul and I have two different voices. We're talking on two different microphones in two different states. So there's no way we're going to be at the same level when we're talking. And sometimes I'll get louder or I'll get quieter. And I don't want you to have to turn up your volume knob when I get quieter and then turn it down when I get louder. So the fact that Pocket Cast is compensating for that with software is kind of a shame on other podcasters. That's all I'm saying. It's great that they're doing that, because Downcast doesn't do that. That would be a great addition to that, because so many shows I listen to, they don't do that. Some of the ones when I'm in my truck, I've got to crank the volume on the stereo in my truck because the podcast itself is so quiet because they didn't master on the last step and change the LUFS, it's called, to this industry standard of -16 to -19. And it's just too quiet. It's just too quiet to actually hear. And they didn't do that final step. So now when I'm listening to that podcast and I finish it and it goes to the next one and they did it right, or it's louder, now I've just blasted my eardrums out because, you got to ride the volume knob. So anyway, that feature alone would almost make me switch to Pocket Cast just to not have to deal with that anymore.
Yeah, it's great. It really it's like with the photo app when you run it through the brightness and contrast, right?
Yeah. When
suddenly everything pops a little more.
Right.
You don't have to do it radically different, but it makes people's voices pop above the basic din of whatever's going around. Which is nice. I mean, it's great. Again, this hasn't revolutionized the way I listen to podcasts, but it's made it a little more frictionless.
Right.
And I like that. Well,
we'll see if being bought by NPR turns every podcast that's on there into basically This American Life. And what's that NPR sound on everything? We'll see if they had that filter. All right. Well, again, we asked to hear what kind of augmented reality things you're into. I'm also interested to hear how you listen to this show. So leave something in the comments and do you listen on the website? I know some people do. Or what's your favorite podcasting application? What do you consume podcasts on? How are you listening to this right now? Like, what are you listening to? Go comment either on the show page. If you click in the show notes, you'll probably, depending on the podcast player you're using, it'll take you right to this page. Or you can comment on Facebook or, wherever you found us. So that's it. You got anything else, Paul?
No, that's it for this week. But again, you mentioned before, but anybody out there who's listening to this, who's planning on doing a poster session with something that they think is new and interesting, not just in the content of, but in the presentation, we'd love to hear it because we only scratch the surface of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody. And thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Chris. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at arcpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.